you ready? Stuart, I'm lost. So said a colleague on the phone to me yesterday. He was on his way to a meeting with me, and Moorland isn't the easiest place to find. Well, I said, do you know where you are? No, he said. Awkward pause. Well, can you tell me where you've been so far? And then we were able to piece together his journey, which had seen him almost entirely circumnavigating Moorland without actually hitting it. But what I could do was then work out where he'd come from, where he was now, and how to get to me. And the point of exposing his stupidity to public humiliation like this is to make the point that navigating your way through life isn't easy. You don't have to be the sort of male that can't stop to ask for directions to know that. We can't know where we are now, let alone where we might be going, unless we know where we've been so far. Today we're continuing our theme of remembrance, and John set up my thought for me beautifully last week with his wonderful reflection about the power of the land to tell our story. And today I'm thinking of the power of the stories themselves. I've been lucky to spend most of my adult life working with stories in one sort or another. In my legal days, my job as an advocate was to tell my clients' story from their point of view. And now as a vicar, I do the same sort of thing for my parishioners and even for God. And I love the fact that my hero Jesus told stories all the time, but I've realised that people don't always understand the power of stories. People often think that they're just for children or they're just for entertainment. But for me, stories are what help us to make sense of the world we're living in. They tell us who we are, they help us to understand the characters we meet, and they help us to understand where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. I think it's no accident that J.K. Rowling in the climax of the Harry Potter books uses a children's tale as the central device that leads to the destruction of the evil Lord Voldemort. The wise old Dumbledore says, "That which Voldemort does not value, he takes no trouble to comprehend. Of house elves and children's tales, of love, loyalty and innocence he knows nothing. That they have power beyond the reach of any magic is a truth he has never grasped." I think she's onto something there. The blind and the foolish fail to recognise the power of stories. For example, it seems to me that the biggest mistake we made in the war in Iraq was that we didn't learn the story of that people, which determined the way in which they'd interpret our actions. According to our story, our actions were intended as liberation. But according to their story, our actions were interpreted as imperialism, as a continuation of the Crusades, an event that we thought was long ago dead and consigned to the dustbin of history. But actually, history doesn't die. Our stories and the stories of those around us just go on and on. They really matter. They are the lens through which people interpret the world. And throughout human history, humans have devised means of remembrance, helping them to step back into their history. The Jewish people developed one of the most powerful examples of this in the tradition of Passover, which they used to remember their release from slavery in Egypt and being set free in their promised land. This is something that on best estimates happened probably 4,000 years ago, and yet it's a story that directly affects each of them today. And each year they tell the story as though they personally were there. For us, at this time, we remember particularly our war dead, and the way in which, for our tomorrow, they gave their today. We tell their story as if it was our story, because in fact it is. We have our freedom because they gave theirs. And likewise, the causes of the war that cost their lives were the same cocktail of greed, aggression, fear and despair that lurk just below the surface in every human being. We need to tell their story in order that we can understand where we are and where we might be going. And we need to hear others' stories too, even those of our enemies, in order that we can understand them and also begin to address that greed, aggression, fear and despair that afflicts us all in humanity. And perhaps by hearing and understanding each other's stories, we can begin to seek a common story that will end in peace and hope. And since that seems to be the end of every story ever written, there's good reason to hope that it might be the end of our story too.